In this lesson, we'll look at how we interact with Dreamweaver in the code, design, and split views when editing our HTML files. We'll take a look at the tip of the iceberg of all of the things that Dreamweaver will do to help you with your work as a website designer. And we'll also look at a few things to look out for when using Dreamweaver. Also, we'll look at how we can bring an image into our HTML site and how Dreamweaver will manage our files. I'm going to look in the Files panel. In the Files panel, we can see all of the individual files that make up our site. We've been looking at these files previously using Finder, but as we get started using Dreamweaver, you want to have a behavior change. You want to stop using Finder to manage your site, and you want to start using Dreamweaver. Now within Dreamweaver, I'll open the lesson_02_home.html file by double-clicking on that file in the Local Files view in my Files panel, and I can see the design view is displayed. I know the design view is displayed because this design tab is selected in the upper left-hand corner. I also have a code tab on the left-hand side, which I can view by clicking on the code tab button, and I see a view of my HTML file that looks very much like what you've been working with before in Notepad or TextEdit. Dreamweaver is color coding my HTML. This has no functional benefit. It's merely a tool to help you recognize like items of code. If I scroll back up to the top, I can also see that an external file is referenced, and I can view and edit the contents of that external file by clicking on that external file name. We'll come back to editing our external files in a little while, but for right now I'll switch back over to the source code for my HTML file so that I can see that from either the code view or the design view, I have the option to bring up the split view, which will show me the design view on the bottom and the code view on the top at the same time, which is kind of handy for getting a really quick preview if you're accustomed to editing your HTML and you want to see what those changes look like real quick. As we modify the contents of the code view, those changes will be reflected in the design view. So if I were to add an exclamation point after the word telescope in my main page heading, and if I were to come down and click inside the design view so that the design view refreshes, that exclamation point appears. Likewise, if I wanted to edit within the design view and I position my cursor after the exclamation point and on my keyboard hit the delete key, that exclamation point would go away and I can see that change in the code view. Now it's usually at this moment that I find students have that ah moment and perceive that they no longer need to know HTML. Nothing could be farther from the truth. This is a critical moment for you as you define your learning agenda for the next several years. Being a web designer, as you've seen, is a continuous process of learning. One thing you never want to do is stop learning. You might be inclined with Dreamweaver or any other WYSIWYG editor, and a WYSIWYG editor is not a Dr. Seuss term. This design view is a representation that can be described with the acronym WYSIWYG, which stands for What You See is What You Get. Editing in the design view can be quite handy, and I use the design view for edits occasionally. However, the design view is not perfect. The only way you'll know how your page looks for sure is to preview it in a web browser, and the design view will not always accomplish what you're looking for. You must not allow yourself to form the habit of working only in the design view, giving up ownership of your HTML code, and just working away as if editing HTML pages was working in a word processor. If you do that, a couple of years from now, you'll find yourself with a deadline that you can't meet, and you might be asking yourself, why can't I make my program do what I need to do? The way that that particular question is worded highlights the problem. if you allow yourself to form the habits of having your HTML editing tool be responsible for maintaining your HTML, you're going to be in trouble. Let's take a look at a very quick example of why that might be. I'm going to bring the split view back up again. And to create a little bit more space, each of these tabs along the bottom can be collapsed by double-clicking on the panel title. See, my properties are still available for me to view if I double-click on the panel title. I want to see a little bit more of the design view, so I'm collapsing that panel. Now, what I want to show you is what might happen if you start dragging and dropping elements on your page, just as you would as if you were using a word processor. If I select the main H1 title on the page, notice what's also selected in the code view. Notice the words are selected, but the opening and closing H1 tags are not. If I were to, after having selected this text in the design view, then drag and drop that element to a different space on my page and release, notice that the formatting is lost. You can see in the code view the words are preserved, but the opening heading 1 and closing heading 1 tags didn't come with me. Now I'm going to, from the edit menu, undo that because I don't want this error. I could alternatively, if I wanted to make that edit actually happen, I could select the element I wish to move inside the code view and drag and drop it inside the code view. And when I release and refresh the design view by clicking in it, I can see that change quickly to know that it occurred correctly. That's okay. But you must keep an eye on your code. You must always and cannot cede responsibility for maintaining your code. So now if I refresh the design view and save, my file is back the way it was before. Now with our file back in its original state, let's take a look at how we can bring in images into our page. I'm going to hide Dreamweaver for a moment and take a look inside the Chapter 9 folder. Outside of the images directory, you'll notice there's one image off floating by itself, 25_Web, which is a NASA image of the Hubble Space Telescope. I'm going to bring this image onto my desktop, outside of my site's local folder. This seems a little counterintuitive, but you'll see where I'm going with this in just a moment. What I want to do is switch back over to Dreamweaver, because I wanted to show you why you specified a local root folder inside your website when you were using the Manage Sites function. If I were to collapse some of these panels, which I can do by double-clicking on the panel name, I can start to see a little bit of my desktop, including that file which we put on the desktop a moment ago. What I want to do is I want to drag and drop that file into the design view as a means of getting it into my web page. But as we've seen, Dreamweaver may not always put elements where we want them inside our code. I'm going to put a little bit of temporary text inside my HTML file on purpose to help Dreamweaver understand exactly where I want my image to go. I want my image to show up after my last unordered list item. But I also want it to be contained within the main content div, and I can see the closing main content div here, highlighted in blue. So, I'm going to put my cursor after the closing unordered list tag and hit the return key a few times. And I'm going to type some text. Image goes here. I'm not actually going to leave this text in my file, but I'm using it for the moment so that I can switch over to the design view. And when I refresh the design view by clicking anywhere in it, or on the scroll bar on the right-hand side, I can see that text shows up. Now I only put this text here so that I could quickly click inside that text and know that in the code view that my cursor for sure is outside of my closing unordered list tag, but inside my closing div tag for my main content region. So, knowing that my cursor is where I want it to be, I'm going to drag the image from the desktop itself directly into my page and release inside this temporary text. When I do that, Dreamweaver gives me a dialog asking me to specify an alt tag. That's what this alternate text label represents. So I can specify an alt tag, which we've seen before, such as Hubble Space Telescope, and click on OK. And when I do that, the image comes in and is previewed inside the design view. And I can take out these image references that I typed, not break the opening and closing tag, and clean up my code a little bit. But notice the image reference. It's not pointing at the desktop. It's pointing at the local root folder inside the images directory, which you specified when you defined your site as the default images location for your site. Dreamweaver made a copy of the file on the desktop. Notice that the file on the desktop is still there. I can go and delete that file, and the image is still correct here in Dreamweaver. The reason that the image is still appearing properly is if we expand the images directory in the Files panel, we can see Dreamweaver made a copy of the image. We now have a copy which was not in the images directory at the beginning of this lesson. Handy quick way of getting an image into a page. I'm going to click here in the design window and scroll down to the bottom of the page. But also using Dreamweaver, there are a couple of other ways you could get images into your page. Another way is if the image is already inside the images directory, you can simply drag and drop the image from the Files panel into the design view and release. I'll just click on OK for right now. And I can see that I now have two images in the design view. Likewise, if I just leave my cursor in the design view and from the Insert menu, Insert Image, I can browse to the location on my computer where the image resides that I want to insert into this page. And I'll just click on OK real quick, because this is a temporary sample, and I can see now I have 3 images of the Hubble Space Telescope. I don't actually want 3 images. I'll just delete these 2 that we added a moment ago by deleting them from the code view by selecting and deleting as we've done before in TextEdit, and switch back over to the design view and see that the image shows up on the page the way that we were expecting. And as always, before I do anything else, I'll save my file, because it's only when we've done something that we like that your computer will crash.